The Catholic Bible contains more books than the Protestant Bible because of events that happened long before Christ was born. During the Babylonian exile, the Hebrews were scattered across the eastern Mediterranean, and many never returned. Those who were in the east and never went back to Jerusalem lost their native language. They were unable to read or write Hebrew after just a few generations, but they wanted to maintain their connection with their faith. In order to do this, the Jewish scriptures had to be translated into Greek. So 100 years before Christ is born, we have two versions of the Old Testament. We have the Hebrew canon of Scripture, and we have the Greek version of the Old Testament scriptures. And the Greeks themselves wrote additional books that were never translated back into the Hebrew. This Greek version of Scripture is called the Septuagint. And if we look at the New Testament, 80% of the quotes that Jesus and the apostles make to Old Testament scripture are from the Septuagint. This is important because the Greek version is much more Christological and much more prophetic than the Hebrew versions of the scriptures. Isaiah is different, for instance. Jeremiah is different. And the differences in the Greek version point much more clearly to Christ than those in the Hebrew. So when it came to the point that the apostles were proselytizing to those in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Hebrews were seeing enormous numbers of their fellows converting to Christianity, they decided to canonize their Old Testament, and the rule they used was anything written in Greek was not scripture. Why did they pick that rule? Because the Greek scriptures were so Christological that people would convert simply by reading them. But it was the Greek scriptures that were used by Jesus and the apostles that were used constantly during the early church. And when people attempted to attack the scriptures, question what was part of scripture and what wasn't, the churches decided what actually was and wasn't scripture. By the late 300s, the early 400s, the popes and the councils of the church had defined scripture according to the Septuagint. The Septuagint, as I said, had more books. By the 1500s, when Martin Luther came forward with his faith alone theology, he found that the excessive Christology of the Old Testament also pointed to elements of doctrine that did not support faith alone theology. So he was forced to move back to the Hebrew canon of Scripture in order to support the ideas that he was bringing forward. That is why all of the Protestant scriptures now have fewer books in the Old Testament than those that are present in the Catholic Bible. The interesting point is, up until 1827, there was no version of Protestant scripture that did not include those books. Luther did not entirely throw them out of the Bible. He simply lifted them and placed them into an appendix between the Old and the New Testaments. The first time a Bible was ever printed without those books was 1827. The English Bible Society first promulgated a Bible that was missing those books. Prior to that, centuries before, it had even been illegal in England to do such a thing. Under the Protestant kings, anyone who put forward a Bible that was missing those books could be beheaded.